I like cubing. There's a few things I still need to improve in, like more efficient look ahead and using better finger tricks. But there's one thing I think I'm really good at, and it's this. Did you catch it? How about here? Or here? Well, it's not so much what I'm doing, but what I'm not doing. You see, I've learned how to finish all my solves with 0 pauses.
Technically, the very last thing you do when solving the cube isn't the PLL, but the AUF. That is, adjusting the upper face after permuting the last layer. I don't know why they don't just call it ALL, but basically it should look like the final AUF move was part of the PLL. I remember watching JPerm's video last year in which he said that my AUF was too slow, and I tried to get better at it, but it wasn't easy. I mean, after finishing OLL, my poor brain not only had to quickly recognize which of the 21 PLL cases I had, but also try to remember how to even do that PLL. Adding a third thing onto that was too much for my synapses, and also how much time would I save anyway? Probably less than a second, which wasn't a huge deal since I was averaging 20 to 30 seconds at the time.
But JPerm was right, partly because he's Canadian, but also because he isn't the only person to talk about this. Saving that half a second could be what helps you break that PR, and maybe more importantly, you feel like a complete boss when you can AUF without a pause.
Now, whenever people ask me to make a video on specific cubing tips, I usually just point them to other videos because why reinvent the wheel? But as you can obviously see, I'm making one now, and it's because I think I've developed a new technique. Okay, it's probably not 100% new, and many of you probably already do this, but I want to be the first to formally detail it in a video and explain some of the science behind it. If you'd like to see more stuff like this, by the way, gently press that subscribe button and you will be subscribed.
So this is how beginners finish the cube. They'll recognize the PLL, execute the PLL, figure out the AUF, and then do it to solve the cube. And this is how people say it should be done. You recognize the PLL and figure out the AUF, then execute the PLL followed by the AUF to finish the cube.
Before you start your PLL, you should be able to tell which way the AUF will be.
Spot your AUF before you start PLL.
But I like to suggest that for the average cuber who isn't getting constant sub 15-second solves, a new and perhaps better way of doing it would be this. Recognize the PLL, figure out the AUF while executing the PLL, and then AUF to finish the cube. The reason why I say that is because most of us take at least 2 seconds to execute PLLs. I mean, we can't all be Lucas Etta, but that's more than enough time during which to figure out what the AUF was on the PLL you just saw.
But wait, you say, if you've started executing the PLL, then how would you still be able to see it to figure out what the AUF would be? Good question, but I think you already know the answer. You don't need to be seeing something to still see it.
Here's an example. I'm going to show you 3 words to read. Ready? Go. So what were those 3 words? Most of you should be able to say happy, golf, and purple. But here's the thing. I showed you those words for exactly 0.2 seconds, way shorter than the time it actually takes for you to process and read them. So how did you do it? Well, your memory did it.
Because your visual system is processing so many things all the time, not everything that your eyes see actually makes its way into your conscious thinking. Psychologists believe that we actually have this super short memory bank called iconic memory, such that if we want to, we can access anything our eyes have just seen within the last second or so. So your eyes saw those 3 words in that split second, but because of iconic memory, your brain was able to process and read it after it had disappeared. Pretty cool.
And so applying it to AUFs, it means that I can still just focus on figuring out which PLL case I have, and while I execute those moves, use iconic memory to recall how that layer was oriented and decide on the AUF in time for when I actually need to do it. In other words, as you do the PLL, remember what the AUF was and finish with it without needing to check again at the end. One way to practice this is after OLL, look at the cube, then close your eyes and finish the rest of the solve.
But I should say that this will only work with a few conditions. Firstly, you should be able to execute all your PLLs completely by muscle memory. If you're still at that early stage where you need to consciously think about what moves you're doing in a T-perm, for example, this isn't yet for you. Secondly, you need to be able to know what the cube looks like after doing each PLL. This is a pretty easy thing to learn, and it's what I'm going to spend the rest of the video on. Also, this advice is probably mostly for intermediate solvers. Okay, let's go through all the PLLs, and I'll do it in a similar order as I did in a previous video on how I learned the PLLs.
So starting with the U-perms, this is what it looks like when you don't need to AUF. It's when all 4 corners are in place. I mean, that's what a U-perm is. It's just a 3-edge swap. So I do the U-perm using the M and U method, but this will apply to the RU method as well. One convenient thing is that the way that I hold it, my left index finger is already completely ready to do U or U prime or U2 moves. So say you found the cube in this position, the AUF for this is just going to be a U prime because that's going to get all the corners in place. And like I said before, that's what I think in my head once I've already started doing it. This time, because I can see that the corners are opposite colors to the face that I'm holding, it's just going to be a U2 at the very end. Next up, the A-perms. This one's just a 3-corner swap. And of course, most of you will know that if this block here is aligned, you don't have to AUF. That means if you see it like this and the block are opposite colors to these faces, the AUF is going to be a U2. And if they're adjacent colors, I just think in my head while I'm doing the PLL which way it has to go. In this case, it's going to go this way. So it's going to be a U prime at the very end. Next, the JB perm, lots of people's favorite perm. So the way that you recognize this, of course, is that you've got that 3-color block over there. And the way that I know whether an AUF is needed is to compare this like 2-piece block over here, next to that 3, with this face. If it's the same color, you don't have to do any U move at the end of the alg. And so another way of thinking about it is that these 2 pieces stay over here. So if you do JB to this cube, the green edge will be here, which means a U will be what's required at the end to finish this. In this case, you'll want to do a U prime to get the green over there. And when you've got opposite corners, it's just a U2 at the end. JA, or the L perm, is very similar, but I find it a bit hard to comment on because there are so many different algs for it. If you do it like this way, which I think is the most common way, you just have to keep in mind the fact that this face is going to end up over here. And so if you are holding it like this, you're going to have to finish with a U prime. But if it looks like this, you're not going to need to do any U move at the end because that's going to end up over there. As you may have seen from my other video, I do JA using a bit of a strange alg, but the principle is the same. The T and the Y perm are next. Not too much to say here, except this is what it looks like when you don't need to AUF. This little block here and this little block here, it's not going to move. And this block and this block here isn't going to move. And so, if you get a case like this, where it's all opposite and this is the same, then you're going to have to do a U2 at the end. And then, same, U2 at the end over here. And if I was doing this, I just keep in mind, oh yeah, at the end, I want that red to be there. And so while I'm executing T, I'm thinking at the end, I need to do a U, which I might do by dragging. Just the H perm, really interesting one. One of the perms that you can do from any angle. This is what it looks like when you don't have to AUF. So if you need to do an AUF, you just think about where those corners, the headlights, needs to move when you finish it. I vaguely remember though, in a video that Felix made, I think, where he says that he actually likes to align that top layer first before he does it so that no AUF is required. I could be making that up, but I tend to do that too. The Z or the Z perm, a really cool but slightly annoying one. You might recall that the very end of this alg ends with a U2, and that means that if you start like this, you don't have to do that U2 at the end. I actually quite like it when I get this case. So the tricky thing happens when the top layer is misaligned by one move, and this used to confuse me for a really long time. So when I look at this, I sort of instinctively think, well, these corners need to move over there, and so I guess the final move would be a U. But look what happens when I do it. The final move is actually a U prime. And so what I've taught myself is that it's the opposite of what I think. So with this case, for example, instinctively I would think, oh yeah, I will need to do that, a U prime, to finish it. And so it's the opposite. So I start the Z perm or the Z perm, and I have to make sure to end with a U. Here we go. Voila, the R perms I used to find really tricky until I saw a video in which J perm said that the middle color between the headlights is the one that stays the same. And so if I'm holding it this way, my final move needs to be a U prime because this color stays the same. If it's like this, then my final move needs to be a U2. If it's like this, my final move needs to be a U. And if this, I don't have to do an AUF at all. So this case, for example, opposite colors. And so right at the end, a U2. The F perm, using the most common alg for it, this is how you hold it when you don't need an AUF, when that solid block over there is on the left. So if this is what the cube looked like, the final move is going to have to be a U prime. The F perm is actually a really nice one to go straight into because you start from home grip. So sometimes, I'll notice a block and I'll just go straight into it. Like I said before, I'm thinking in my mind, because that bar was over there, it's gonna end with a U move at the end. The E-perm, definitely my worst one and the one I take longest to recognize. So this is what it looks like when you don't have to AUF using the alg that I use. All the edges are aligned, and then because it swaps this way and this way, that color is the same as that side there. For this one, I find that I normally just end up aligning it, and because I need to regrip anyway, I will sort of just like regrip while rotating it at the same time. Not sure if that's ideal. Feel free to chuck something in the comments if you've got a better way of doing it, but that's how I do the E-perm. So if I was holding it like this, I would, oh, that is correct. If I was holding it like this, for example, align the edges, and then I realize, oh, I'm gonna have to regrip anyway, and so I'll just go straight into that and then solve it. And our lovely N-perms, which I actually don't mind. I'm just a bit slow at them. Just like the H-perm, this one can be done from any angle as well. But with the algs that I use, this is what it looks like when you don't have to AUF. So when this 2-piece block over here is the same as the face that's facing you. And so it's similar to the JB perm, I guess, in that you can think of it as these two pieces not moving. And so if it was like this, it's gonna have to end with a U prime move to move the blue over there. If it's like this, these two opposite colors, it's gonna have to end with a U2. And if it's like this, it's gonna have to end with a U because the green needs to move over there. U. And the same thing for the other N-perm, except the block is on that side. Oops, you get what I mean. And finally, the G-perms. So GA, GB, GC, and GD. I think all of the common ways of solving them start with the headlights on the left. And well, that's the way that I think about it. It's a very convenient way of thinking about it because not only am I aligning the headlights to the left when I'm getting into position to start the G-perm, but also the headlights are the ones that don't move. And that's a really convenient thing because then all you need to think is about which way do I need to turn the top layer so that these two matches up with their color. So in this case, of course, it's just gonna need a U prime at the end. And so do the G-perm. And then the way that I do the G-perm often ends with a D move, and that's when it gets a little bit tricky because you're sort of doing two at the same time. I guess a little practice needs to happen in this area, but basically I don't even think about that D move that I'm doing. It's just part of the alg, and it's a pretty nice thing to be able to do them both at the same time. So going backwards now to GC, when I see this, I know I'm going to have to do a U2 before I can start the G-perm, so my headlights are on the left, and then I'm going to have to do a U2 again at the end to bring, you know, the red back to where it is at the very start. This one's GB, so align the headlights, and then while I'm doing it, I think, oh, red was on the left and it needs to go there at the end. I can talk fast enough for me to show you how I was thinking as I was doing that. And then finally, of course, as you know, if the headlights align, you don't have to do any AUF the end. What a great way to finish.
Well, I really enjoyed making this video and explaining some of the psychology behind it. Our brains are pretty amazing. Hopefully, you'll no longer need to check your cube after the PLL to know how to finish it and can just slam it down on the table like a total boss. And then realize you got a +2. But hey, we all gotta start somewhere.